D&D 5e creature stat blocks, well, they're kind of basic templates. They try to cram an entire race or history into one stat block, and then more often than not, they fall short. Take large creatures, for example. Their size rarely translates into their attacks against smaller foes. It feels like a missed opportunity. Now sure, if you're an experienced DM, you can work around these limitations. A master artist can take a cheap paintbrush and still create something legendary, right? But what about the rest of us? What if you're just a DM with a small toolkit? Or like me, somebody with ADHD, who wants a clear, laid out list of options? I'm no tactical genius, but I like to know what I can do up front. That's what today's video is all about. I'm going to give you those options with my rework of the 2014 Wyvern. But before I do that, I want to dive into the lore from the 2014 Monster Manual, and then I want to break down the 2014 stat block and give my opinions on it. So let's get into that. And now for the exciting part. Let's look at the 2014 Monster Manual lore. This is on page 303 of the Monster Manual. Wyvern. Travelers in the wild sometimes look to the skies to see the dark winged shape of a wyvern carrying its prey. These cousins to the great dragons hunt the same tangled forest and caverns as their kin. Their appearance sends ripples of alarm through the borderlands of civilization. A wyvern has two scaly legs, leathery wings, and a sinewy tail topped with its most potent weapon, a poison stinger. The poison in a wyvern stinger can kill a creature in seconds. Extremely potent. Wyvern poison burns through the victim's bloodstream, disintegrating veins and arteries on its way to the heart. As deadly as wyverns can be, however, hunters and adventurers often track them to claim the venom, which is used in alchemical compounds and to coat weapons. Aerial hunters. A wyvern doesn't fight on the ground unless it can reach its prey by any other means, or it has been fooled into a position from which aerial combat is not an option. If forced into a confrontation on the ground, a wyvern crouches low, keeping its stinger poised above its head as it hisses and growls. They are aggressive and reckless. A wyvern intent on its prey backs down only if it sustains a serious injury or if its prey eludes it long enough for another easier potential meal to wander along. If it corners a fleeing creature in an enclosure too small to enter, a wyvern guards where the quarry hides, lashing with its stinger whenever opportunity allows. Although they possess more cunning than ordinary beasts, wyverns lack the intelligence of their draconic cousins. As such, creatures that maintain their composure as a wyvern hunts them from the air can often elude or trick it. Wyverns often follow a direct path to their prey, with no thought given to possible ambushes. So, that brings us to the 2014 stat block. Let's jump in and see what Wizards of the Coast has presented us with. Alright, so here we are, 2014. Boy, it's been a long time since 2014. Let's look at how much things have changed, shall we? So we have a large dragon. It is unaligned, so it has no moral quandaries. Its armor class is 13, its hit points are 110, it's got a movement speed of 20 feet, and a flying speed of 80 feet. That's pretty dangerous. Let's look at the ability scores. We have 19 strength, 10 dexterity, 16 constitution, 5 intelligence, 12 wisdom, 6 charisma. We have a skill of perception +4, but we don't have any saving throw proficiencies. Something that a lot of creatures from the 2014 Monster Manual lack are any saving throw proficiencies whatsoever. It's kind of weird. I guess I get it if this is supposed to be like the commoner, quote unquote, of a wyvern, but then again, this is a large dragon that has been alive long enough to become an adult. You would think it has some sort of proficiency in at least a strength saving throw. It's got 19 strength. Anyways, we have a dark vision of 60 feet, passive perception of 14. Wizards of the Coast has clocked this in at a CR6 monster with a proficiency bonus of +3. Alright, let's get into the actions. The Wyvern makes 2 attacks, one with its bite, one with its stinger. While flying, it can use its claws in place of one other attack. So surprisingly, this creature actually has 3 different things it can do with its multi-attack, which is very impressive, considering most of the other creatures I've looked at usually have a whopping maybe 2 things it can do. So at least this creature can do 3 different things. Now, it has flying, so if you're a DM that likes to make use of flying and things of that nature, you can make it swoop down, make a grapple check, pick somebody up, fly up 80 feet, drop them. But that takes a lot of action economy to do that, and it usually... The Wyvern uses its whole action to possibly grapple something, and then it misses, and then nothing happens. So I think there should be something else that lets it do that. If you're a new Dungeon Master, your mind is probably not even thinking of that. Let's just be honest here. When we're new, there's so many things that are overwhelming you as a Dungeon Master. I think creature stat blocks need to have a little bit more to tell you things that this creature can do. Anyways, let's keep going here before I ramble on too long. We got a bite attack, it's +7, it's got a 10-foot reach, it does 2d6 piercing damage. So that's pretty good damage. It's a great sword attack, essentially. That's all it can do with its bite. It can't grab you in its mouth, whip you away. It could if you were, you know, a Dungeon Master that can improvise stuff, but let's look at this as if you are just the average DM who's not very good or imaginative with a lot of things, especially in the tactical category, okay? Claws. We got a +7 to hit, reach 5 feet, 2d8 slashing damage. Can only make 2 claw attacks if it's flying, which makes sense because the Wyvern doesn't have the frontal arms like a dragon does. Its arms are replaced with its wings, so it can't really use its claws efficiently unless it's flying. The stinger. Now this is what makes the Wyvern the infamous monster of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. This is a 10-foot reach. It does 2d6 piercing damage, but that's not the important part. The important part is the poison. This is legendary poison. You remember from the intro, this poison disintegrates your arteries and anything that it comes across inside of your body on its way to your heart, supposedly. Now, the creature has to make a DC 15 con save. On a failure, they take 7d6 poison damage, or they take half of that on a success. Now, 7d6 poison damage is nothing to scoff at. Okay, that's a lot of damage. But if this is legendary poison that we're talking about, I think you should just take the poison damage and then make the con save. Otherwise, it's not very legendary if some people can just toughen up and resist the damage. I think you should just take that damage to the face when you get hit with the stinger. People might disagree with that. I like to think that we can make things a little bit more difficult, especially with this upcoming edition of D&D. We don't even have a monster manual yet. So that's going to conclude the 2014 Wyvern. Let's look at mine. And as we go into mine, I want to reiterate that I'm not claiming to be better than Wizards of the Coast. I'm just simply laying out more tools for the average Dungeon Master to work with. So yes, you can take this stat block and do crazy things with it, but I think you could take mine and do crazy things with it a lot easier because I lay it out for you. That's what I like. Some people might not like that, but let's get into it. Okay, so because of the sheer amount of difficulty increase that I have introduced to the Wyvern stat block, we're going to start at the bottom of the food chain in the Wyvern's life cycle here. And I did go through the entire Wyvern life cycle, so we're going to start off at the babies, the BB Wyverns, okay? This is a Wyvern hatchling. It is a small dragon, so it's about the size of a cat or a small dog. Armor class of 11, hit points 24, flying speed of movement speed of 10 feet, flying speed of 25 feet. Nothing to write home about. Ability scores, in fact, pretty low. We have an 11 strength, 10 dex, 11 con, 2 intelligence, 10 wisdom, 2 charisma. Very low ability scores. Pathetic, even. Commoners have higher charisma and intelligence than a hatchling wyvern does. I did give it a saving throw proficiency of strength. These are naturally strong creatures. They have all these other weaknesses, like really low intelligence and charisma. They should have a saving throw proficiency, at least where it makes sense narratively. These are strong creatures. Anyways, let's look at the immunities here. Wyvern Venom is the only immunity that the wyvern has. In their lore, it states wyverns are immune to each other's venom, so they can't poison each other with their own venom. They do dislike the taste of other wyverns' venom, so much so that a wyvern will not eat a corpse of a creature that another wyvern has stung and killed. Even a mother wyvern stinging, let's say, a cow, for example, and killing it, the baby won't eat it because the mother's venom is inside of it. So it makes sense that they should have an immunity to wyvern venom. The baby has a much less ranged dark vision of 25 feet. I can't talk, excuse me. We have languages now, which we didn't before. They actually can fluidly speak Draconic. They just really don't like to speak. So you're going to have to really press a wyvern to get it to talk. And they also speak wyvern because they do have their own language, quote unquote. It's not really a language, it's more of like shrieks and screeches. So let's look at the only special trait that the hatchling has. It can't use its talons if it's grappling a creature with them. Makes sense, right? It'll come into play on the bigger wyvern stat block, so you'll see why I have that in there. Now let's look at the actions here. There are still the same 3 actions, but I split them up differently to kind of help you visualize what each quote-unquote weapon attack can do. So for the talons, because I've never made a stat block like this yet, this is actually how I want to do all of my stat blocks going forward. I think it looks clean. I think it helps you differentiate like what attack is coming from what body part. And then let's say one of your players cuts off one of these body parts, then the creature can't use anything from that category. Anyways, the talons, it tells you at the top, it's a melee weapon attack, it's got +2 to hit, they have a range of 5 feet. And then it has one type of talon attack it can do, that is the slash attack. It does 2d4 slashing damage on a hit. Self-explanatory, right? Then we go to the bite. It's the same thing, it just tells you what it's called. So this is the Gnash ability, does 1d6 piercing damage on a hit. Now we have the Stinger. Now this is a baby wyvern. Wyvern venom is very, very, very potent, but as a baby, it's probably not going to be that potent. And this is kind of here for if you want to use a wyvern against a much lower level party. This is your introduction to the wyvern. So their Stinger has one attack, and that is called Venom Sting. It does 1d4 piercing damage, plus 2d6 poison damage. If the creature is not resistant or immune to poison damage, it has to make a DC 10 con save. On a failure, the creature takes 2d6 poison damage at the start of each of its turns for 1 minute, and it repeats the save at the end of each turn, ending the effect on a success. Now you'll notice a key difference with my wyvern is that when you get stung, you just take the poison damage. You don't roll a save to reduce the poison damage. If this is venom that is disintegrating your arteries, you don't resist that. You resist the ongoing damage from it, not the initial damage. So I think that's a much better way to kind of represent a legendary poison such as the wyverns. I think the wyvern is in like the top 5 most deadly poisons in Dungeons and Dragons. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but that's how I was viewing it when I made these creatures. But you know, there's your introductory wyvern. Let's get into the bigger ones because I know that's what you all want to see. So that's the first one. Okay, so our wyvern is growing up here steadily. We are at the young wyvern now. This is medium now. It's grown a little bit. So now it's about the size of a small, maybe a large dog, in fact, a Great Dane-sized creature. A large lamb, a large sheep-sized monstrosity. So you can see the stats immediately have increased across the board. Armor class has gone up by 1, and I took the formula that they used for dragons, so I looked through my monster manual and I just looked from the wormling up to the ancient dragon, how did their stats increase, and I just pretty much copied that formula. So armor class is going to go up by 1 every time we go up a tier, and then the hit points kind of go up. It's hard to gauge how the hit points increase. They kind of go up by, from the baby to the big one, 3 to 5 die, and then the large one goes up by even more die. So what is the word I'm trying to think of here? The die denomination has gone up, so from the D6 to a D8 now, because it's a medium wyvern. So 71 hit points, much higher now. It's got a movement speed of 10, flying speed of 60 feet, much further than the baby. Its ability scores have increased. It's got higher saving throw proficiencies. Everything else has pretty much stayed the same, so I'm not going to go over the base stats for every wyvern because you'll see those whenever you look at the stat blocks on my Discord, which you should join, by the way. Link in the description if you want to get these stat blocks for free. I've painstakingly made all of them and I upload them to my Discord. Let's look at the first special trait. This is abducting talons now. So the wyvern is actually big enough to grab creatures. So this is if the wyvern flies at least 10 feet straight towards a target and hits with 2 slash attacks. The target is, if the target is medium or smaller, the wyvern makes a grapple check. On a failure, the target is grappled, and that says the escape DC is 12, and the wyvern cannot attack other creatures with its talons while grappling. The wyvern doesn't provoke opportunity attacks when it flies out of an enemy's reach this way. So a farmer steps out of his home. He sees one of his calves running around in the field, running towards the barn, in fact, as you see a wyvern come down, swoop in, sink its talons into the creature, and fly off with it. That's what this is supposed to represent. That's what they do. That's their attack tactics, okay? Now, let's get into the exciting stuff. And I can't tell you how excited I was to finally have figured out a way to make my stat blocks look a bit cleaner while also giving multiple different styles of attack actions for the different weapons that the creature has. So again, it's starting to make a little bit more sense now that we're seeing the bigger wyverns, I hope. So this wyvern has the same multi-attack. It makes 2 attacks, one with its bite and its stinger. If it's flying, it can make 2 talon attacks and 1 stinger or bite attack, not both. So let's look at what the things that the bite attack can do. So the bite attack is a +4 to hit, and it has a reach of 5 feet. So that's for every type of bite attack. Now we're going to get into the quote-unquote type of bite attacks. So the first one is Gnash. It's just your basic attack. It does 2d6 piercing damage. That's the damage attack. But now, the secondary thing that the bite attack can do is Whip Away. Same thing, you just choose which one of these it's doing with the attack roll. So, Whip Away only does 1d6 piercing damage, but if it's a large or smaller creature, it is thrown up to 15 feet away in a direction of the wyvern's choice, and then the creature has to succeed on a DC 12 Dex save. On a failure, it lands prone. Now, this is the medium wyvern, so that's actually going to say medium, not large. That's a mistake on my part. I was copying. I started off with the adult wyvern before I made these ones, so there's going to be a couple mistakes you might see, but I will fix them before I upload them to the Discord. So that's what the wyvern can do with its bite. What can it do with its stinger? Well, now this is where the wyvern starts getting dangerous, because it's a developed wyvern now. So with its stinger, it can make 1 type of attack, and that is venom sting.
does 2d4 piercing damage for the young wyvern, and then, yes, the full 7d6 poison damage. There's no save to resist the poison damage, you just take it. If the creature is not resistant or immune to poison damage, it must make a DC 11 con save. On a failure, it takes 7d6 poison damage at the start of each of its turns for 1 minute. It repeats the save at the end of each turn, ending the effect on a success. Now here's the kicker. Legendary poison, mind you, disintegrates your arteries on the way to your heart. If the save failed by 5 or more, the creature dies. Yes, there's an instant kill ability on the wyvern's poison now. Don't at me. I think it's very fitting and it makes a lot of sense, but don't freak out too much, because if you didn't realize, if the creature is not resistant / immune to poison damage, it has to make that save. So you need to prepare when you fight a creature like this. There is no just, the paladin just wanders up and he starts attacking this wyvern that they did no preparation or research on. They get punished for it. If they don't have a potion of poison resistance, the cleric doesn't prepare protection from poison spells, they're gonna suffer the consequences. That's how it should be. That's how old D&D was. I'm trying to bring the game back to that. Good preparation should reward players versus brash decision making and charging in headstrong. Not that that's not fun, obviously. If you have a group of barbarians, that's probably what they're gonna do, but if a wyvern has legendary venom, I'm gonna make my wyverns have legendary venom, and you guys are gonna have to try to figure out how to get around it, which the way to get around it is potions of poison resistance. Now, I might add lesser restoration can end this effect too. That makes sense because it can clear a poison, I'm pretty sure, so that'll be updated before it hits the Discord, but that's the only thing you could do with the stinger. Let's look at the talons now. So with the talons, you can do a slash attack, which does 2d4 slashing damage, or a topple attack, which does 1d4 slashing damage, and then it knocks, this should say medium or smaller creatures prone. So they have to make a DC 12 strength save. On a failure, they get knocked prone. And they can make 2 talon attacks total. So they can make 1 slash attack, 1 topple. They can make 2 topple attacks. It's up to you, however you want to do it. But now, I'm just giving you more tools to work with. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Let's get into the bigger wyvern now. Okay, here we are. We're in the big game now. The big game is flying overhead, and this is starting to get scary. So this is the adult wyvern. This is what I looked at from the monster manual. This is the picture that you're seeing in the monster manual. This is DM Dungeon Mastery's version of the adult wyvern. So the first change, obviously, other than the stats increasing, the first change you're going to see are saving throws. It has a con saving throw now. It has an acrobatics proficiency. Its dark vision has gone up to 120 feet. And its challenge rating is 7. Might even need to be a little higher than that. Its abducting talons now force a dex save instead of a grapple check. So if you fail the dex save, you just get yoinked, essentially, if you get hit with 2 slash attacks. Now, let's get into the actions here. So here's what I was talking about whenever I said that I want to give the average dungeon master more tools in the toolbox to work with, other than trying to improvise things on the spot. Because it does get very draining to have to improvise everything, and I think on average, all of the creatures in D&D 5th edition just need to be jacked up, because player characters are so strong. They're superheroes that are nearly invincible in a lot of situations, unless you make the fight deliberately designed to kill one of them. They tend to never struggle with things unless it's just a string of bad dice rolls. So what this type of stat block does is it makes your players think, because they're always going to be on their toes not knowing what the wyvern is going to do next. So we have object drop. This in parentheses states that it requires an object, so you can't just use this. You have to make it pick up rocks or something. You could even do this with a body. So while flying, the wyvern can release a medium or large object from its talons, targeting a point below it in a 10-foot radius. Each creature in that radius must make a DC 15 Dex save. On a failure, the creature takes 1d6 bludgeoning damage per 10 feet the wyvern is above the ground. So maximum of 8d6, so that's about the speed that the wyvern can. It's the wyvern's flying speed. That's the max amount of damage it can do. So if it's up 80 feet in the air, it can do 1d6 per 10 feet, which is 8d6. And if it failed that save, it gets hit with 8d6 and it gets knocked prone. Makes sense, right? They go flying in, they're dropping boulders, they're dropping things on your head. You're gonna probably fall down after you get smashed. Let's look at our next thing here. Let's go to the talons. So yes, this wyvern's talons can do 3 different things now. Same old thing, melee weapon attack, they all have +7 to hit, they all reach 5 feet. So unless it specifies something else, that is the base attack roll and range of all these attacks. So this wyvern slash attack does the 2d6, but it now has rend, which is 2d4 slashing damage, and if the creature is large or smaller, it has to make a DC 15 Constitution save. On a failure, the creature is lacerated, like the werewolf. But somebody had commented that they shouldn't be able to just hit a giant and make it bleed to death, so I changed it to large or smaller, and it's 2 slashing damage at the start of each round for 30 seconds or 5 rounds. So if you're outside of combat, it's 30 seconds. If you're in combat, it's equivalent to 5 rounds. And this bleeding continues until you receive magical healing or you make a successful DC 10 medicine check with a healer's kit. And this effect is cumulative, so it stacks with each instance of lacerated. So they go from 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 damage a turn until that is cured some way. I wanted to add the healing kit in here because I really feel like the healer's kit is just looked over more often than not. How many times do your players get to use the healing kit? Really, never. What if you wanted to make a healer that isn't a cleric or a druid or a spellcaster? Why can't we have physical healers? I think the healing kit should be reworked a little bit, in my opinion. So I'm trying to add in things that give the healer's kit a benefit, actually a reason to use it. So we do have topple. So this is the same thing, but now this is large or smaller creatures. When they get hit with this, they have to make a DC 15 strength save. On a failure, they're knocked prone. I could probably make that bludgeoning damage instead of slashing, but I just figured they're probably slashing you with the claws, not punching you with them. Who knows, maybe if I get feedback, I'll change that to bludgeoning. So let's move on to the bite attack now. Alright, so these are the things that it can do with its bite attack. Its Gnash attack, which is the basic damage. Think of it like a basic attack, like an auto attack from League of Legends. If you play League, this is an auto attack. It just does 2d8, it does the most damage, but it doesn't do anything else. Now we have Rip and Tear, which does less damage, but it cripples larger, smaller creatures. So it's biting down on you, it's tearing into you, ripping pieces of you off, and it cripples you. So your movement speed is reduced by 10 feet until you receive magical healing or a successful DC 10 medicine check with a healer's kit. This does not stack. This is just a flat. Your movement speed is reduced by 10 until you get healed. Pretty cool, pretty flavorful, in my opinion. Now we have Whip Away. The young wyvern had this, but it's just more potent on the bigger wyvern. So imagine you're up in the air on a dragon, and a group of wyverns fly up and they start attacking you. They can rip you off that dragon's back and just throw you 15 feet in a direction, and then you just go plummeting to your doom. So hopefully the wizard prepared Featherfall. Let's look at the stinger now. It's pretty much the same thing as the younger wyvern. The stinger is supposed to be the dangerous effect on the wyvern. This is the thing that makes it infamous, so nothing has really changed other than the physical damage from the initial hit has gone up from 2d4 to 2d6 now. So you get punctured with it, you take that 7d6 poison damage. If you're not resistant or immune, the con save has gone up because the wyvern is getting bigger, so its poison is getting more potent. Pretty good, pretty good. Now, Venomous Drop is the last action. This I got from, I watched the Mr. Rex video on what you didn't know about wyverns, and he states pretty early on that wyvern venom starts dripping out of the wyvern stinger like a faucet of black tar. So it just leaks and seeps out. They choose for it to do this. So this is me taking creative liberties. While flying, the wyvern can secrete its thick tar-like venom from its stinger, coating a small area in a 20-foot long, 5-foot wide line. Each creature in that line must make a DC 14 dex save, so nothing happens if they succeed this save. So this is a risky maneuver here, but on a failure, they take 3d6 poison damage, and they're coated in venom for the next 10 minutes. While they are coated this way, they have disadvantage on perception checks, dex saves, and attack rolls. Melee and ranged weapon attacks against the creature deal an additional 2d6 poison damage, so that's essentially like you get stabbed with something and that venom is leaking into that wound, causing extra damage. And I have a little sun that tells you what to do to clear the venom, so if the players ask you, what can I do to get this off of me, this is what you tell them. It can be wiped away with an action, the creature can submerge itself in water, or clear it with a prestidigitation cantrip. So giving prestidigitation a little bit more viability other than just a role-playing thing. Overall, I think this is a good change. I think this gives you a lot more to work with, but we're not done yet. I have a couple more wyverns to show you. Okay, here's your end-all, be-all, big boy, scary wyvern. This is the dire wyvern. This wyvern has stronger stats across the board in all facets. I think that's the word I'm trying to use. Hopefully I didn't use the wrong word and sound really stupid, but then again, I probably did. The ability scores are off the charts. 23 strength, 20 con. Well, I don't want to say off the charts. Their intelligence is slightly higher than the other wyverns, but they're still not smart. They're dumber than the average commoner. They do have an intelligence saving throw proficiency just because these are quote-unquote smarter than the average wyvern, but they're really not that much smarter. They're just slightly smarter. They have an acrobatics skill, an athletics skill, and a perception skill. The other wyvern, I think, had 2 of those, but this one has the acrobatics. Other than that, nothing has changed too much. Pretty much saving throw DCs have gone up across the board. We will look at some of the things really quickly, but just assume that the damage has gone up on pretty much everything. The biggest change is the stinger is different. The huge stinger now does 4d6 piercing damage on a hit. Still does the 7d6 poison damage because I don't want to make the poison different. The poison is what it is. It's 7d6 poison damage. That's still a lot no matter what level you are. But the worst thing about this one is if you're not resistant or immune to poison damage, you make a DC 18 con save. If you fail, you die. There is no, you're taking damage at the start of every turn. No. You just die. This one kills you as the poison burns through your bloodstream, disintegrating your veins and your arteries on the way to your heart. I think that's a good change. I'm kind of looking at this now, and I think I should go back in for all the venom and say if this damage reduces you to 0 hit points, you die. So I'm probably going to end up doing that before I release it to the Discord. And yeah, it's pretty much, that's the dire wyvern, okay? Lots of damage, lots of scary. The venom is even scarier to deal with. If your players manage to kill this and harvest it, you don't have to make the venom more potent. Just describe it like, because the stinger is so huge, it's pumping twice the amount of venom into you, which is why it's more potent and able to just kill you. And a DC 18 con save, that's a pretty high save. That's close to 20, which is a difficult save. So that's pretty scary. Hopefully I delivered with this one. I think a lot of you guys will like this as a boss monster. We're not done yet, though. We still got 3 more wyverns to look at, so let's keep moving. Alright, it's spooky season. We're gonna be probably trying to cram undead and skeletal creatures into every rework going forward until we are out of October, or until I decide I don't want to do zombies of every monster I make. But this was a pseudo Patreon request. I was gonna make it anyways, I had a feeling, but somebody really wanted it, so here it is. This is the adult wyvern zombie. So those of you that have necromancers out there and you really want your necromancer to have undead creatures that are other than just humanoid zombies, or, you know, zombie ogres, because that's really all we have, and zombie beholders. But let's go down here really quickly. We don't have to go over the ability scores and the stats. Everything like that is going to be very similar to the adult wyvern, other than what the zombies lose and gain. So their dexterity tends to go down and their wisdom tends to go up, along with their int and charisma going down even further because they're dead. They have vulnerability to radiant, resistance to cold, and they are immune to necrotic, poison, and psychic. I forgot to add the condition immunities, but charmed, frightened, exhaustion, and poisoned will be the condition immunities, and unconscious. So 5 condition immunities that we'll have on here. I will fix that before I upload this to the Discord. Let's look at the special traits for this zombie though. Now this was something that somebody requested that I add onto the undead, and it does make sense. They should have just a passive fear associated with them. You're a living creature and you're fighting an undead, you're probably going to be scared of it. Now you can hand wave this if the character is a necromancer. You could say they're immune to mortal dread, but when they're not immune to mortal dread, what it states is when a living creature that can see the undead does so for the first time, it must make a DC 15 wisdom save. On a failure, it is frightened for 1 hour, but you can repeat the save at the end of each of your turns and it ends on a success. The creature is immune to the wyvern's terrifying presence trait for the next 24 hours if it succeeds, but I added something else in here. So, familiar face states, if the undead was someone or something the creature knew in life, the saving throw is made at disadvantage. So now, when you put this on all your zombies, and your player character's wife shows up as an undead, they have to make the saving throw for the wisdom at disadvantage. I think that's pretty flavorful. I think that works. This zombie has Vigor Mortis. That's stayed the same. Undead Fortitude on this creature is going to be pretty nasty. So its con is pretty high with an 18, so it's going to be hard to take this creature down without radiant damage. But the clerics and the paladins are going to be your MVPs of this fight when you run this. So if we look at the actions, they did lose some of the things that they knew in life, so they're not doing anything super tactical other than on their talons they can still topple creatures. The bite attack is where the unique stuff comes in. Because it's a zombie, I want its bite attacks to be unique. So instead of Gnash on its bite attack, we have Rotting Gnash. So this does 2d8 piercing damage, and if it's a living creature, it has to make a DC 15 con save. On a failure, they are poisoned until cured by lesser restoration. So that's pretty big. It's supposed to be like you've conducted gangrene or something like that. You're rotting from this bite attack. It's probably got diseases in it. It's probably really gross, and you know, that's your benefit for raising a zombie wyvern. You want to have something that makes it different from just a zombie. Then we have Grave Crunch. This is a pretty cool ability. I did take somebody's advice. They mentioned that I should put prone creatures only. So you can't use this attack unless the creature is prone. I deviated from the Wizards of the Coast wording there, so it's more clear on how that's supposed to work. Living creatures must make a DC 15 con save. On a failure, the creature is poisoned unless by lesser restoration. So it's the same as the Rotting Gnash, but because you're attacking the creature and it's prone, this automatically critically hits larger, smaller prone creatures. Just gonna make it do 4d8 piercing damage. Not a humongous difference, but it just gives you a little bit of oomph whenever you're prone and you're fighting this creature. Let's look at its stinger. So, the wyvern's rotting away. It's probably not producing the venom anymore, but it's still got venom left in it. It's just coagulated like molasses. So I made it a recharge. So it's not going to be able to get it off every single stab with the venom. But when it's on cooldown, you have the dry sting. So it just does the piercing damage and nothing else. So you can still use the stinger attack. I think that's a pretty decent, flavorful zombie for your necromancers, or if you're a player character and you want to raise something from the dead, if you're a nice enough DM, you can give this to your player character so he feels awesome. That's what we're trying to do at the end of the day. Make your players feel heroic, but don't just give them free victories. Make them work for it, but give them cool stuff in return. So this is something that would be really cool to raise as an undead. I'm not sure if Create Undead lets you raise CR6 monsters. I'd have to look at that, but you can figure out a way to get around that. That's one version of an undead wyvern. If you are in the Discord, you've seen this next one, so let's get into that. Okay, here we go with the much more glass cannon-y cousin of the zombie wyvern. This is the skeleton wyvern. So this is just, it's different in pretty much most ways than the zombie wyvern, because this creature cannot fly. The zombie can still fly because there's still flesh on the wings. Not as fast as a living wyvern, but it can still fly. This one cannot fly. I gave it 5 extra movement speed to compensate for the lack of organs and skin and all the other stuff that comes with being alive. We got the damage vulnerability gains bludgeoning on this one, so bludgeoning damage is going to deal more damage. This has the damage resistances from cold, piercing, and slashing from non-heavy weapons. So cold is separate, so it's cold damage and then piercing and slashing from non-heavy weapons. So if you stab this thing with a lance, you're still going to deal full damage. If you hit this thing with a great axe, you're still going to deal full damage. If you stab it with a spear, you're not going to deal as much damage. I think that makes sense, right? This is where the immunities will be on the zombie. I just forgot to add it to the zombie stat block when I started recording and I didn't want to stop. So charmed, exhaustion, frightened, poisoned, unconscious. Makes sense. Languages, it can't speak, but it understands what it knew in life. We get to the special traits. We have bone structure. So, pretty good. It makes your attacks with piercing damage at disadvantage, so that's a bonus. That's a benefit that the skeleton has over the zombie. Not that piercing damage is all that common. We have necrotic absorption is still on this one too, so when it takes necrotic damage, it heals that many hit points instead. Mortal dread on the skeleton doesn't have familiar face because there's no face. It's just a skeleton. The flesh has slopped off the face, right? Makes sense? Now, the skeletal wyvern carries a disease. This is something that I came up with. I wanted it to not have venom in its stinger anymore, but I wanted it to carry some sort of very rare esoteric disease. So this is wasting strain. Wasting strain is a rare disease found in the decaying bone marrow of a wyvern's stinger, only transmittable when the wyvern is in advanced stages of decay. The disease preys on creatures with weaker or slower metabolisms, typically those of large or smaller size. Infected creatures experience gradual muscle degradation, intense pain, and lethargy. And this tells you a creature infected with wasting strain suffers disadvantage on all dex and strength-based attack rolls, saves, and ability checks. So yeah, that's pretty scary. Every 24 hours, the infected creature must repeat the con save. On a failure, its strength and dex mod are reduced by 1d4, and that's, you could roll 2 different d4s or just 1d4 subtract from both of them. If this reduction lowers one of these scores to 0, the creature dies. The cure is greater restoration or similar magic, so you can wish that away, etc., etc. But that makes it separate from the zombie. already. That makes it a different creature altogether. That's one thing. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a carbon copy of the zombie and it worked differently. So we'll go through the attack actions really quickly here. Slash and topple are the same. The skeletal bite is different though. So Maw of Death. Remember, all of my other skeletons have that. They've lost all the flesh, so the necrotic energy is just pulsating out of this creature. So when you bite something with Maw of Death, it has to make a DC 13 con save. On a failure, the creature is vitality drained. So it gains a point of exhaustion, has a -1 on con saves until targeted by greater restoration or similar magic, and this effect stacks. So pretty scary, pretty dangerous. It's unique. It makes it definitely a creature with something to be afraid of. Rip and Tear is the same. You know what that does because you've seen the other Wyvern. Now let's look at this Stinger here. So this is just Skeletal Stinger, Sting of Rot. It does 2d6 piercing damage and it does 2d6 necrotic damage. This is how you pass on the wasting strain disease from the Skeletal Stinger. So, pretty cool creature. It's more of a glass cannon because it has that vulnerability to bludgeoning damage. Yeah, I think that's a pretty fun monster. I think you guys are going to like running these. Let me know if you do run these, what your player's reaction is when they fight one. So, we're not done yet. We have one more to show you. This one came from an older edition of D&D, so let's look at this final Wyvern. Okay, this is the Fell Wyvern. This is from 4th edition. I guess it's kind of similar to Matt Mercer's Wyvern. I can't remember the name of his. It's not called a Wyvern in his campaign though, probably for copyright reasons. Let's look at this Wyvern. Again, the stats are fairly similar, except this Wyvern is actually fairly intelligent because this is a Shadow Fell Wyvern. That's why it's called a Fell Wyvern. This is an actual chaotic evil creature, so this does have moral quandaries of chaotic evil. So its saving throws, it actually has an intelligence and a wisdom save, so that's pretty... That kind of tells you that it's a bit more intelligent and sentient than the other Wyverns. Well, they're all sentient, but you know what I mean. Acrobatics, athletics, perception, and stealth skills. The stealth is a big one. That's a pretty scary one. We have damage resistances to necrotic. This is still a living creature, though, so it's not an undead. So it doesn't have the undead resistances to anything. This is similar to a shadow dragon though, so let's look into the special traits here. Abducting talons didn't change, but living shadow, shadow stealth, and sunlight sensitivity are 3 unique things to this Wyvern. Living shadow says when in dim light or darkness, the Fell Wyvern has resistance to all damage that isn't force, psychic, or radiant. That's pretty strong, especially if you're fighting this in the Shadowfell. Everywhere is shadow, unless your characters cast the daylight spell or the light spell, which is good. That's a fun way to fight such an enemy. Shadow stealth is while in dim light or darkness, the Fell Wyvern can take the hide action as a bonus action. That's pretty scary. That's very terrifying because then that means this creature is going to be attacking with advantage, and you don't want to get hit with the stinger on this thing. Sunlight sensitivity, this is where if you cast this spell daylight, you really can screw this Wyvern over. It rewards creative role-playing. So while in sunlight, the Fell Wyvern has disadvantage on attack rolls as well as wisdom perception checks that rely on sight. You know, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Let's get into the actions. We're only going to go over the ones that are different. Pestilent Breath. So yes, this Wyvern has a breath weapon, but it can only be used once per day. And I gave it this because the Wyvern from 4th edition called the Fell Wyvern, which is what I got this idea from, has a breath weapon. It does ongoing damage in the 4th edition one, so I wanted to make this one similar. It exhales a repulsive pestilent breath in a 20-foot cone. Each living creature in that line must make a DC 15 con save. On a failure, they take 10 D10 necrotic damage, and they are coated in a cloud of pestilent smog that deals 2 D10 necrotic damage at the end of each of their turns for the next minute. They can repeat the save at the end of each turn, and it ends this on a success. So it's a pretty cool once per day bomb-like ability. That's 10 D10 necrotic damage. That's nothing to scoff at. Let's look at the bite. That's the first differing attack here. We have Fell Gnash, which does 2d6 necrotic damage. All of the bite attacks have necrotic damage on them now. So Rip and Tear has necrotic damage. Whip Away has necrotic damage also. Let's look at the Fell Stinger. This is different. This is a Necro Venom Sting. So it does the piercing damage. It does 76 necrotic damage instead. So it's got the same mechanics. If you're not resistant or immune to necrotic damage, you have to make a con save. If you fail, you start taking 7d6 necrotic damage at the start of each of your turns for 1 minute. You repeat the save, you end it on a success. If the save failed by 5 or more, you still die. However, this is the big one. This is the scary one. This is the holy shit moment. If you're a living creature and you're damaged by this necrovenom, all of the necrovenom damage reduces your max HP until you are targeted by a greater restoration. And if you are reduced to 0 hit points by this venom, you die. Incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. Let your players do some sort of research, for the love of God, before they go into the Shadowfell and run into one of these, because that's going to catch them off guard. Although if they have a cleric with greater restoration, they're not going to be in too bad shape, but if you're fighting 4 of these, yeah, you're going to be in bad shape. So that's a pretty cool, pretty nasty sting. Let's look at the final ability here of the video. We have Necrovenomous Drop, not just Venomous Drop. So same thing, it secretes the tar-like substance. They have to make a DC 15 dexterity save. If they fail, they take 3d6 necrotic damage, and they are coated in venom for the next 10 minutes. While coated this way, they have the same disadvantage on things, except instead of the I think it was dexterity saves, it's constitution saves now. So that's going to actually combo with its necrovenom sting. So they have disadvantage on constitution saves, and they have disadvantage on attack rolls. Additionally, melee and ranged weapon attacks deal an additional 2d6 necrotic damage. Now this says, if you die while you're coated in venom, your flesh and organs are rapidly stripped from your body, and you rise as a skeleton, hostile to all nearby living creatures for the next minute, before you then crumble to dust. I just added the crumble to dust because I thought that would be pretty unique, pretty scary. It's a pretty shocking thing to happen to a player character. It kind of just adds insult to injury, but then again, this is a high-level monster that should not be fought without proper preparation. Clearing the venom is the same way. So that's a repertoire of wyverns for you guys to play around with. Let me know what you think if you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I worked pretty hard on these. It took me quite some time to get them all set up and ready to go, but I hope you like the new format where I have the type of weapon along with the type of things the weapon can do. That's kind of what I want to do going forward. Might want to rework all my giant stat blocks like that. It might clean them up a little bit. Anyways, it's been DM Dungeon Mastery, and I'll see you guys in the polls for the next creature rework, because I had an idea. Let's see what we can come up with next, shall we? Thanks guys, appreciate ya. I'll catch you later.